The Forgotten Heir, a fantasy mystery. Prologue. The fire beneath the throne. Long before Elian drew his first breath, the kingdom of Valorborn was already rotting from within. It had once been a realm of wonders, a land where magic hummed beneath the soil like a second heartbeat, and knowledge bloomed in the halls of marble observatories and silver towers. Scholars had debated stars by candlelight, and the people walked streets lit with runestones that pulsed gently at dusk. But that golden age was snuffed out not by war, but by fear. King Alaric Vare, last of the line touched by the spirits, ruled not with an iron fist, but with a mind sharpened by arcane wisdom. His was a reign of harmony, between magic and monarchy, spirit and sword. Yet whispers began to curdle in noble halls. Some said magic made the king arrogant. Others said he communed with things no man should understand. Fear, like rot in an apple, spread unnoticed until it was too late. A vision had haunted Alaric since youth, a child born under a twin eclipse, destined to restore the broken bond between the realm and the unseen. He believed the prophecy. Others did not. On a windless autumn night, the gates of the royal palace opened from within. Betrayal wore the uniform of loyalty. Queen Thalendra, once Alaric's distant cousin and closest advisor, unleashed her private legion upon the sleeping castle. They carried no banners, only fire. The screams of the innocent were smothered by smoke and steel. The king died with his blade still sheathed, poisoned before he could fight. His queen fell beside him. Their eldest son was run through in the nursery, but the youngest, a newborn swaddled in royal violet, was spirited away by a midwife with ash in her hair and secrets in her blood. That night became legend. The purge followed, swift and merciless. Those with magic in their veins were burned, their names erased from the record. The ancient sigils were shattered, the scholars executed, and Valorborn became a hollow echo of what it had once been. But fate is a patient thing, and the bloodline, though scattered and forgotten, had not ended. Chapter 1. The Letter in the Ashes. The first snow of winter drifted down like dying embers over Daromir, a half-forgotten village clinging to the outer fringes of the kingdom like moss on stone. Smoke rose from crooked chimneys, curling skyward in thin, brittle spirals. The thatched roof sagged under the weight of age, and the narrow lanes of frozen mud told stories of struggle and survival. Elian hunched over a soot-blackened pot in the dim corner of a crumbling cottage. He stirred what little remained of the boiled roots Mara had left him, thin slices swimming in water that tasted more of metal than nourishment. Hunger clawed at his ribs, but he was long past the point of complaint. When he tilted the pot, hoping for something heartier beneath the broth, all he found was grit and ash. He sighed, letting the wooden spoon drop with a dull clatter. His hands were red with cold, his fingers cracked and dirt-lined. He was 17, though the villagers always guessed older. There was something prematurely worn in his eyes, something too still in the way he moved. Old Mara had raised him, or rather tolerated him. A sharp-tongued herbalist with a face like a dried apple and the temperament of a bear roused too early from hibernation, she never claimed him as kin. But she fed him, taught him how to listen to the wind in the leaves and how to coax medicine from thorns. She warned him never to speak of strange dreams, never to look too long at ravens, and most importantly, never to trust men who wore grey. Whenever Elian asked about his parents, she would mutter the same phrase, always the same way. Ash and secrets, boy. That's all your blood is made of. It wasn't until the day Mara died that he learned just how literal those words were. The illness came quick. One morning she was bent over her herb jars, grinding dried lavender with steady hands. By noon she was shivering, her breath rattling like loose coins in a cup. Fever glazed her eyes, and her skin flushed with a heat Elian's poultices couldn't quell. He tried everything she had taught him, root and resin, whisper and ward, but the fever took her anyway. She passed just before the moon reached its peak, her bony hand clenching his wrist like a trap. Her eyes locked on his, burning with clarity for one last moment. "The box," she croaked. "Beneath the hearth, not all truth burns." Then her hand fell away, and with it, the last breath of the only person Elian had ever called family. The villagers came at dawn, offering stale bread and hollow condolences. No one wept for Mara. She had no friends, only debts of knowledge and suspicion. They helped him bury her beneath the twisted oak behind the cottage, an act more of ritual than affection, then left him to his grief and to his silence. That night, by candlelight, Elian pulled away the hearth's loose stones, ones Mara had always kept carefully covered. Beneath, amid a bed of blackened coals and brittle, curled parchment, lay a tin lockbox coated in soot. Its hinges groaned as he pried it open, revealing only a single scroll. The parchment was yellowed, its edges brittle and curling. A wax seal held it closed, faded but unmistakable, a raven perched on a silver crown. He broke the seal with shaking fingers and unrolled the scroll. To the rightful heir of the kingdom of Valaborn. The rest blurred. His breath caught. The name at the bottom was written in an elegant hand, firm, declarative, Elian Vare. Not just a name, a claim, a curse, a beginning. Chapter 2. The Law of Silence. The road out of Daromir was more a memory than a path, half buried under frost, overgrown with bramble, and watched closely by the twisted silhouettes of skeletal trees. Elian's boots, too thin for the season, cracked through frost with every step, his breath misting in the cold air like a fading ghost. He didn't look back at the village. There was nothing there for him now. No home, no family, only ashes. In the hours before dawn, he walked beneath a shroud of quiet too deep for birdsong. His satchel, worn and patched a dozen times over, now held secrets older than the kingdom itself. Elian touched the letter within with cautious fingers, still unsure if it was real. The wax seal, cold and unbroken, pressed against his side like a second heartbeat. He remembered Mara's words before she died. Not all truth burns. But in Valaborn, truth was dangerous, especially the kind etched in royal wax. By midday, he reached the fork where the road split, one path leading to the coast, the other inland toward the old kingdoms. He chose the latter, guided not by certainty but by instinct, as if some long-forgotten memory tugged at the edge of his mind. The trees grew thicker here, the light dimmer, and always just at the edge of hearing, a whisper, not quite wind, not quite voice, lingered behind him. That night, he camped beneath a half-fallen stone arch, likely once part of a long-abandoned road post. He lit a fire using flint and moss soaked in pine resin, a trick Mara had taught him during one of her rare indulgent moods. As the flames took shape, flickering shadows danced across the stones and trees, and Elian opened the letter again, tracing the royal script. To the rightful heir of the kingdom of Valaborn. If this message reaches you, it means you have survived what so many did not. The House of Heir has not fallen by fate, but by treachery. Magic has been buried, but not destroyed. You carry its last light. Seek Aravan Hollow. There memory endures. There the throne remembers. His thumb brushed over his name, Elian Vare. He said it aloud once, and the sound felt foreign on his tongue, as though he were speaking someone else's fate. He wasn't a prince. He was the orphan boy who grew bitter herbs and boiled roots, who knew how to silence a cough with crushed bark, who could identify poison by smell alone. What business did he have with crowns and kingdoms? Yet the letter felt heavier than the satchel it sat in. He could not ignore it, and the world would not let him. The next morning he awoke to find strange tracks circling his camp. Not wolves, not deer. Something else, two-toed long strides barely touching the ground. He doused the fire and moved fast. A day later he heard the first howls, thin and shrill, like flute notes played through broken glass. The Inquisitors were near. They were not men, not entirely. The stories said they had once been scholars, twisted by the Raven Queen's alchemists into things that could smell magic on a person's breath. They travelled with crows and rode horses with hooves wrapped in leather to muffle their sound. If one came upon you in the woods, it was already too late. Elian's heart beat faster as he pressed deeper into the forest, moving along the old riverbank trails and sleeping high in trees. At night he kept the letter tied close to his chest and held Mara's bone-handled knife beneath his cloak. The knife felt warm sometimes, as if it, too, remembered. Chapter 3. The Watchers on the Road. The days blurred together as Elian pressed forward, his body aching from the constant travel. He had no map, no guide, only a sense that the path ahead would reveal itself when the time was right. But every mile he walked seemed colder than the last, and the heavy weight of the letter gnawed at his mind. The forests became more dense and the land more wild, with hills that rolled like the back of some ancient beast, and stone outcroppings that seemed to reach for the sky like long-fingered hands. The further he went, the more Elian felt as though the world itself was watching, listening. There was a presence in the wind, in the quiet murmur of the forest, a strange hum in the air that prickled his skin and set the hairs on his neck standing. He learned quickly to trust his senses. A single crow circling overhead could mean he wasn't alone. A sudden silence in the underbrush, too quiet, too still, meant danger. He had been followed for days, he was sure of it. The dark shapes that moved just beyond his sight, the shadows that seemed to lengthen unnaturally with the setting sun, the crows that grew more numerous the further he went, they were not coincidences. Someone or something was watching him. By the fourth night, Elian could no longer deny the feeling in his gut. He was being hunted. It was well past twilight when the figure appeared by the roadside, sitting in front of a small campfire that flickered like an offering to the dark. The man's back was to him, but the faint glow of the fire reflected off his dark, weathered cloak, and something about his stillness gave Elian pause. He approached cautiously, fingers wrapping around the hilt of the bone-handled knife. He had no intention of letting his guard down, not in a world that seemed to be filled with hidden enemies. "You carry a name that was meant to be buried," the man said, his voice calm and knowing, not the least bit surprised by Elian's presence. He did not turn to face him. Elian froze mid-step. His heart skipped in his chest. "Who are you?" Elian asked, his voice hoarse, trying to hide the tremor that threatened to betray him. His eyes narrowed, scanning the man's form, looking for signs of threat. The man remained seated, eyes closed as if in deep thought, hands resting on his knees. He was older than Elian had first guessed, perhaps in his 40s, with a face marked by time and hardship. A scraggly beard dotted his jawline, and his eyes, when they opened, were dark and sharp, almost too sharp, as if they saw more than most could. "A friend to the truth, or an enemy if you choose the wrong path," he replied cryptically, his tone cool and disinterested, as though discussing something that had already been settled long ago. Elian's grip tightened around the knife, though he didn't draw it. "I'm no one," he muttered, more to himself than the stranger. "There's nothing for anyone here." The stranger chuckled softly, a low, knowing sound that didn't sit well with Elian. "No one doesn't bear the mark of kings," the man said, gesturing to the wax seal that hung from Elian's satchel. "That seal is not for the likes of you, unless, of course, you are meant to be more than no one." The words landed heavy in the silence, and for a moment Elian couldn't speak. How did this stranger know about the letter? About the seal? The man's eyes glinted in the firelight. "I know what you carry," he continued, "and I know what you seek. You are not the only one searching for the throne, Elian Vare." Elian stiffened. His heart slammed against his chest, but he forced himself to keep his voice steady. "How do you know my name?" The man slowly rose to his feet, tall and lean like a shadow that had grown too long for its form. He moved as though he were part of the night itself, his cloak flowing like liquid darkness. "I was once a scribe in the royal archives of Valorborn," he said, each word clipped with precision. "My name is Rowan, and I've seen that letter before." Elian's eyes darted to the man's hands, trying to decipher the truth in them. "So what do you want?" Rowan did not flinch under Elian's gaze. Instead, he extended his hand toward the fire and pulled a long, slender pipe from beneath his cloak. He held it between his fingers, letting the firelight reflect off its surface before he answered. "I want nothing. I am merely the keeper of knowledge now, a keeper of truths long buried. But I will warn you this, there are those far more dangerous than I who want the throne you claim. You must be prepared." Elian shifted uncomfortably. His throat tightened, the weight of the unknown pressing harder with each passing second. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tumultuous thoughts racing in his mind. Rowan's gaze turned cold and serious. "The Raven Queen, Thalendra, rules the kingdom with an iron fist. She has ruled for decades, and her spies and inquisitors are everywhere. The seal you carry marks you as the rightful heir to the throne of Valorborn, a throne she will never allow you to claim." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The question is, will you allow them to burn you as they did your family, or will you reclaim what is yours?" A cold shiver ran down Elian's spine, but it wasn't just from the chill of the night air. He had heard whispers of the Raven Queen, of her ruthless reign, her magic hunters, and the silencing of all who dared speak out against her. If what Rowan said was true, then the throne, his birthright, was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Rowan looked into Elian's eyes, piercing him with the weight of an unspoken truth. "I can help you," he offered, as though reading the hesitation in Elian's gaze. "But you must choose quickly. Time is not on our side." Elian hesitated, feeling the weight of the letter at his side, the letter that had led him this far. His destiny seemed to pull him in a direction he did not fully understand, but every fibre of his being screamed that this was not a choice he could escape. "I'll go," Elian said at last, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the words themselves were a confession. Rowan smiled faintly, a glimmer of respect passing between them. "Then we leave at dawn." Chapter 4, Blood on the Stone. The road ahead was treacherous, winding through dense forests and treeless plains that stretched out like the lifeless expanse of some forgotten wasteland. Elian's legs ached with every step, but the urgency that pulsed within him kept his pace swift and steady. Rowan, who moved with the grace of someone accustomed to walking through shadows, guided him through the rough terrain without a word of complaint. The man's silence was as unsettling as it was reassuring. His presence, though seemingly calm and detached, carried a certain weight, as though he, too, had been drawn into this web of fate that was only beginning to unravel. The closer they got to Arrivan Hollow, the more the landscape seemed to change. It felt as though they were walking through the remnants of a forgotten world, a place abandoned by time and memory. The air grew colder, and the very stones beneath their feet felt ancient, as if they had witnessed the passing of kingdoms and kings alike. As they reached the outskirts of the ruins, Elian felt a sense of unease settle over him. The remnants of Arrivan Hollow were far more than just broken stone and shattered pillars. The ruins, now overgrown with thick vines and creeping moss, seemed to whisper as they passed by. There was something wrong with this place, something beyond the mere passage of time. Rowan stopped in his tracks, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the precision of a hawk. He tilted his head toward the forest, where a strange stillness hung in the air. For a moment, Elian thought he heard something. A faint noise carried on the wind, but it was gone before he could place it. "Elian," Rowan said in a low voice, his gaze fixed ahead. "This is not a place for the unprepared. The ruins here hold more than memories. They hold power, magic." Elian swallowed hard. He had felt the presence of magic inside him, something raw and unrefined that had stirred to life when he'd touched the circlet beneath the temple. But the thought of what lay ahead, the ancient vaults beneath the hollow, the answers that might lie there, filled him with a nervous excitement. "Then what are we waiting for?" Elian asked, his voice a mix of determination and uncertainty. Rowan's eyes softened, as though contemplating the weight of his words. "Patience is a virtue, but fear is a tool. You will need both, Elian Vare, before you understand the full cost of what you seek." Without another word, Rowan led the way into the ruins. The silence that enveloped them as they moved deeper into the hollow felt unnatural. No birds sang. No wind rustled through the branches. Even the shadows seemed to hold their breath, waiting for something to happen. It was only when they reached the heart of the ruins, the crumbled remnants of a great temple, that Elian finally understood what Rowan had meant. The catacombs beneath the temple were ancient, older than any structure Elian had ever seen. The walls, carved with intricate runes and symbols, seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of old magic, familiar yet foreign, like the smell of earth after rain. Rowan led him to a large stone door, its surface covered in moss and age-old grime. At first, Elian thought it was just another piece of the ruin, but as Rowan placed his hand upon it, the stone seemed to shudder, as if awakening from a long slumber. The runes along the edges of the door glowed faintly, their symbols shifting as though they were alive. "It will not open to just anyone," Rowan said, his voice low and contemplative, "but it will open to the one who holds the bloodline." Rowan stepped back, allowing Elian to approach. He hesitated for only a moment before reaching out, his fingers brushing the cold stone. The moment his skin made contact with the door, a surge of power coursed through him. Magic, ancient and untamed, swirled around him, filling the very air with a crackling energy. It was as though the door recognized him, as though it had been waiting for him. The stone groaned, the door splitting down the center with a low rumble, revealing a narrow passage that descended into the earth. Elian stepped forward, Rowan following closely behind. The catacombs stretched beneath the ruins, deeper and darker than anything Elian had expected. The walls of the passage were lined with ancient inscriptions, their meanings lost to time, but their presence unmistakable. There was a rhythm to the space, a hum that reverberated through the stone and into Elian's bones. It was the pulse of something long forgotten, something that had survived despite the world above it. They walked for what felt like hours, the only sound the soft echo of their footsteps. Eventually, the passage opened into a vast chamber, its floor scattered with debris and broken stone. At the far end of the room, an altar stood, a stone slab covered in dust and grime, as though it had not been touched in centuries. But what caught Elian's eye was the mural on the wall beside it. It was a depiction of the fall of House Heir, the very tragedy Elian had heard whispered in stories. The bloodline's last moments were captured in vivid detail, King Alaric Heir standing tall with his hand raised, a sword in one hand and a crown in the other, as fire raged around him. But there was something else, someone else, a woman, cloaked and defiant, standing beside him, a child in her arms. Her face was unfinished, a shadow where her features should have been. "Mara," Elian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He recognized the woman, his guardian, the one who had raised him in the shadows of the village. She had hidden him during the purge. She had saved him. Rowan was silent as Elian stood frozen before the mural, his mind racing with questions. "She was one of them," Rowan said quietly, as if reading Elian's thoughts. "She carried you away from the flames, Elian. She knew what was coming, and she protected you." The weight of the moment settled over Elian like a heavy shroud. For years, Mara had been a mystery to him, her past, her true identity, all hidden behind the walls of her cottage and the veil of silence she wore. But now, in the heart of the ruins, it was all becoming clear. Mara had known his heritage. She had known who he was long before he ever did. Rowan stepped forward, his gaze lingering on the altar. "There's more," he said. "The vault beneath this chamber, the relics of House Heir are hidden there. But it's not just treasure you'll find." He reached out, pulling aside a large stone slab to reveal a hidden passage beneath. The air that rushed up from it was cold and charged with power, an unmistakable sign that magic had been sealed away here long ago. Elian hesitated for only a moment before following Rowan into the depths of the vault. It was time to uncover the truth, time to claim what was rightfully his. Chapter 5: The Raven Queen. The journey from the Hollow to Caer Thorn was filled with an eerie sense of finality. The deeper Elian ventured into the heart of the kingdom, the more he could feel the weight of history pressing upon him, as though the very land remembered the fall of the Heir family and the rise of Thalendra's iron-fisted rule. The kingdom was a place where fear and silence had thrived for a century, and now it felt as though every stone, every shadow was a silent witness to a past that had been buried but never truly forgotten. Caer Thorn, the capital, rose from the horizon like a dark spectre. Its walls were blackened, ancient stone that had been soaked in blood and memory. It loomed over the land, its silhouette jagged and forbidding, a reflection of the woman who ruled within, Queen Thalendra, known by all as the Raven Queen. Elian could already feel the pulse of magic in the air, but it was a cold, suffocating magic. It was not the warmth of his bloodline's power, but the cold precision of control, an iron grip on both the throne and the realm. Thalendra's reign was built on fear, and her soldiers, the royal inquisitors, were the blade that kept the kingdom in line, hunting down anyone with magic and crushing any rebellion with brutal efficiency. Rowan had grown more distant as they neared the city, his steps measured and quiet. He spoke little, but his eyes darted to every shadow, every alleyway, as though sensing the danger that lingered just beyond the edge of the light. "We must be careful now," Rowan warned, his voice low. "The Queen knows you're here, Elian. She knows you carry the blood of House Heir, and she will stop at nothing to make sure you never sit on that throne." Elian nodded, his mind swirling with the weight of what lay ahead. He had to be cautious. He had to move in shadows. In Caer Thorn, magic was the enemy, and the Queen had her most trusted hunter, a man who had been born from darkness and forged in betrayal. Lord Varric, Thalendra's bastard brother, was the one she had sent after him, and Elian knew that the man would not rest until he had Elian's life in his hands. The streets of Caer Thorn were a far cry from the quiet isolation of Darrowmere. The city pulsed with life, but it was a life that seemed restrained, as though the people were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen, waiting for someone to give them permission to live without fear. Elian and Rowan made their way through the streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares and slipping through narrow alleys where the shadow of the Inquisitors' patrols could not reach. The deeper they went into the heart of the city, the more oppressive the air felt. Elian's heart hammered in his chest, each beat echoing the fear of what they were about to face. Their destination was the palace's archives, an ancient labyrinth of books, scrolls, and forbidden knowledge that was buried beneath the royal palace. It was here that Elian hoped to find the evidence he needed to prove his heritage, to uncover the truth of his bloodline and the role he was meant to play in the kingdom's future. But as they approached the palace gates, Elian could feel the weight of his purpose settle heavily on his shoulders. The palace was a fortress of stone and iron, its walls towering and imposing, casting long shadows over the cobblestones. Guards patrolled the outer walls, their movements sharp and deliberate. The palace itself was a grim place, black stone, stained glass windows depicting scenes of power and conquest. It was a reflection of the woman who ruled it, a symbol of her unyielding control over both the kingdom and the magic that flowed through it. Rowan led Elian through a hidden passage, a narrow gap between two buildings that led to an old servant's entrance. It was a route known only to a few, and even fewer would dare use it. But Rowan had made his living in the shadows, and now Elian found himself walking in them as well. The smell of old books and dust filled the air as they entered the palace archives. The chamber was vast, its shelves lined with scrolls and tomes, some ancient and others more recent. There were whispers in the air, faint echoes of the past, stories long forgotten. But Elian's gaze was drawn to one part of the room, a large stone door at the far end, covered in strange runes. "This is it," Rowan whispered, his voice barely audible. "The archives are guarded by magic, but the door beyond is the key to everything. If you're going to find the truth about your bloodline, it's there." Elian stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. As he reached out to touch the stone door, a shiver ran down his spine. He could feel the magic that lay beyond it, pulsing and alive. But before he could press his hand to the door, a voice echoed from the shadows. "Elian Vare," the voice purred, smooth and cold like velvet. "You shouldn't be here." Elian's blood froze. He turned slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the bone-handled knife at his side. But there, emerging from the darkness, was the last person he ever expected to see. Lord Varric, his presence as unnerving as his reputation, stepped into the dim light. His eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto Elian's with a predatory gaze. His clothes were of the finest fabric, his long cloak trailing behind him like a shadow. He was a man built for shadows, a creature of the night, and in that moment, Elian knew that this encounter would not end well. "I've been waiting for you," Varric said, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You were always a part of the game, Elian. A piece I was just waiting to take off the board." Rowan moved to stand beside Elian, his expression unreadable. "You've been sent to kill him, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Varric's smile widened, his gaze flicking toward Rowan. "You think you know me, but you don't. The Queen has no use for you anymore, old scribe. This boy, however, is a different matter. The blood of House Vare may be valuable, but it's also dangerous, a threat to the throne." Elian stepped forward, his mind racing. He had known this day would come, but he had never imagined it would be so soon, so sudden. "You're wrong," Elian said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "The throne is mine. It's not hers to keep." Varric's eyes flickered with amusement, and he drew a dagger from his belt, its blade gleaming in the dim light. "We'll see, boy," he said. "We'll see." Chapter 6, The Reckoning. The room was charged with tension, the air thick with unspoken threats. The stone walls of the palace archives seemed to close in around them, as if the very foundation of the kingdom itself were holding its breath. Elian's heart hammered in his chest, each beat a drum announcing the coming clash. He could feel the weight of his bloodline, the magic that surged just beneath the surface of his skin, waiting to be unleashed. But there was a coldness to the air that seemed to sap the warmth from his very core. It was the presence of Lord Varric, the bastard brother of Queen Thalendra, and the realization that this confrontation would determine the fate of the kingdom. Varric's blade gleamed in the dim light of the archives, a cold promise of death. His smile was the smile of a man who had long since made peace with violence, a man who knew that the world belonged to those who could take it by force. His eyes, sharp and calculating, never left Elian as he advanced. "You're not ready." Varric's voice was a low growl, the words slicing through the silence like a blade. "You carry the blood of kings, but you are a boy, no more than a puppet to the past. You have no place on the throne. You never did." Elian's hand trembled on the hilt of the knife Mara had given him, the bone handle warm against his palm. He had never been trained for this, never been taught to fight with more than herbs and remedies. But the fire inside him, the ancient magic that ran through his veins, burned with an intensity he had never known before. His father's legacy, his family's legacy, was more than just blood and title. It was a force, a calling, and it was time to answer it. "I don't need your approval," Elian said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him, "and I don't need a throne built on lies." Rowan stepped forward, his expression resolute. "Elian, listen to me. This isn't a fight we can win with steel alone. Varric's magic." Varric laughed, the sound dark and hollow. "Magic? You think you can stand against me with nothing but that ancient, fading power? I have the Queen's favour, the Queen's strength. You are nothing but a dying ember in the wind." Elian's pulse quickened. He could feel the magic stirring within him, a heat that spread from his chest to his fingertips, wrapping around his bones like fire. The archives, this place of forgotten knowledge, had been built to house secrets. And Elian was about to unveil one of the kingdom's oldest truths. With a sudden, decisive motion, he reached out with his mind, feeling the magic around him, the energy hidden in the air, in the stone, in the books lining the shelves. His fingers twitched, and the air seemed to thrum in response. A swirl of wind picked up in the room, books rattling on their shelves, the flickering torchlight casting strange shadows on the walls. Rowan's eyes widened, and he took a step back. "Elian, don't!" But it was too late. The power inside Elian surged like a river breaking through a dam. He thrust his hand forward, and the air around him pulsed with a sharp crack of energy. A gust of wind slammed into Varric, sending him staggering back, the blade falling from his hand as if the very air refused to touch it. The magic was raw, untamed, but it was his heritage, his birthright. Varric growled, a low, guttural sound as he regained his footing. His eyes narrowed and he spread his hands wide, the shadows in the room shifting unnaturally as if the very darkness itself were his ally. "Impressive," Varric sneered. "But you still don't understand, do you? You're a puppet boy, a puppet who's about to learn that even magic can be broken." He raised his arms, and the shadows in the room twisted, forming dark tendrils that lashed out toward Elian. The temperature dropped, and the air grew heavy with the oppressive weight of dark magic. Elian could feel it, the suffocating cold that wrapped around his chest, the dark force pressing against him like an iron cage. It was the magic of oppression, the same magic that had kept the kingdom in check for so long. It was the magic of Queen Thalendra, and it was powerful. Elian gasped for breath, his body trembling as he struggled to stand against the onslaught of shadows. The tendrils of darkness wrapped around his wrists, pulling him to the ground, his head spinning with the force of it. Rowan moved quickly, his voice a harsh whisper. "You have to fight back! This isn't just magic! It's a trap! Thalendra's magic. It's designed to bind, to break. You have to break free, Elian." The words cut through the fog of panic in Elian's mind. He knew Rowan was right. He had to break free, had to use the power within him, not just to defend himself, but to shatter the darkness. His magic wasn't just power. It was freedom. It was life. It was the truth of the Heir bloodline, a legacy that had been stolen, buried, and forgotten. It was the one thing that could destroy Thalendra's reign. With a fierce cry, Elian pushed his hands into the stone floor beneath him. His fingers dug into the cracks in the stone, his magic responding to the call. The shadows hissed and writhed, but Elian's magic burned brighter, a white-hot flame against the darkness. The air crackled with energy as the stone beneath him began to crack, splitting wide open, revealing the raw, untamed magic hidden beneath the surface. Varric's eyes widened in shock. Impossible! But Elian's voice was calm, unwavering. This is my inheritance, my birthright, and I will not let it be stolen again. With a final triumphant surge, Elian's magic exploded outward. The tendrils of darkness shattered, the air filled with a blinding light as the force of his magic tore through the room. Varric staggered back, his expression one of disbelief, as Elian stood, his eyes glowing with the power of the Heir bloodline. Rowan stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "We need to move, Elian. We've drawn too much attention. The Inquisitors will be here soon." But Elian stood tall, his chest rising and falling with each breath, the magic still crackling in the air around him. Let them come. Chapter 7. The Throne and the Burden. The city of Ser Thorn was shrouded in smoke and fire as the echoes of the night's events reverberated through the streets. The palace had fallen into chaos. Queen Thalendra's inquisitors, masked and cloaked in ash-grey, scurried through the halls like rats, their footsteps echoing the relentless pursuit of those they deemed traitors. But the once unshakable Queen's empire was now crumbling from within. Elian's name had been spoken aloud, and the truth could no longer be buried. The bloodline of the Heirs, once thought extinct, was alive, and with it, a power that threatened to shake the very foundation of the kingdom. Elian stood at the edge of the throne room, gazing down at the broken remnants of the throne itself. His inheritance, this symbol of power, was a thing of hollow grandeur. A throne made of gold and fear, built to control, not to heal. His fingers still tingled with the aftershocks of magic, but there was no triumph in his heart, only the heavy weight of responsibility that settled upon his shoulders like a cloak woven from shadows. Rowan's words were a distant hum in the back of his mind as he paced the cold stone floors, the weight of the circlet still pressing against his brow, a reminder of the impossible task ahead. The crown was not just a symbol of rulership, it was a reminder of what he had lost and what had been stolen from his people. "Elian," Rowan's voice broke through his thoughts. "You're not alone in this. You never were. But you must understand, this kingdom is fractured. The people, they've lost faith in the monarchy. They've lost trust in anything that claims to be power. They'll resist you, and that resistance will come at a cost." Elian turned to face him, his face drawn in thought. "I know, but it's not just about the throne. It's about truth. It's about the magic that's been forgotten, the magic of our bloodline, the magic that was buried beneath lies." Rowan shook his head, his eyes wary. "The people will see it as a threat, Elian. Magic was outlawed for a reason. There are those who will never accept what you stand for. There will be more like Thalendra, those who want to keep the power for themselves. And they will stop at nothing to see you fall." Elian's hand clenched around the circlet, the cool silver of it biting into his palm. He felt the power it held, the power of kings, of a lost lineage. He had always known that his destiny was tied to something greater, but now he understood the full extent of what that meant. It was more than a birthright. It was a burden. He walked toward the balcony that overlooked the city. The streets were bathed in the eerie glow of the torches lining the avenues. His gaze swept over the city that had once been a beacon of power, now a place of fear and unrest. The whispers of revolution stirred in the air like a storm waiting to break. The people had once believed in the kingdom, in the idea of the throne. But that faith had been shattered by the lies of the Raven Queen, by the darkness that had swallowed the kingdom whole. Now, Elian was left to rebuild, not just the physical structures of Ser Thorn, but the very soul of the kingdom itself. "It's too late for compromise," Elian muttered to himself. "The truth is out. They'll never see me as anything but a threat. They'll never see me as anything but a shadow of the past." Rowan stepped beside him, his face grim. Perhaps. But the throne is not yours to claim if you cannot wield the truth. Elian, you're not just fighting for your bloodline, you're fighting for the future, for something better, for something that doesn't repeat the mistakes of the past. Elian turned to face him, his eyes filled with a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. And what if I fail? Rowan gave a rare, soft smile. Then you'll make your own history, but I don't think you're the type to fail. The words hung in the air between them, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Elian wasn't just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for a kingdom that had been suffocated by fear for too long. The people had been kept in the dark, bound by superstition and lies. But Elian was the light, the hope they had longed for, the heir that was meant to return. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hall, and the doors to the throne room creaked open. Elian turned to see High Magister Selene entering. Her face pale, but her eyes steady, her presence commanding respect. She was the last of her kind, the last advisor to House Vere, and a living testament to the kingdom's forgotten history. "Elian," she said, her voice firm and clear, "you know what must be done." "I do," Elian replied, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. "But I can't do it alone." "You never have," Selene said, her gaze softening as she approached him. "The magic of House Vere runs through more than just your veins. It is the magic of all those who believed in it. It is the magic of the kingdom itself. You are not just the heir to a throne. You are the heir to a legacy that was lost but is now found." Elian nodded, the realization settling within him like a stone in his chest. His family's legacy was not one of conquest or power. It was a legacy of unity, of magic that connected the realm to the spirits of the earth, the sky, and the stars above. And it was that very magic that would either save or condemn them all. "The throne isn't just mine," Elian said, his voice growing stronger. "It belongs to the people. It belongs to the kingdom, and I will not let it fall again." Selene placed her hand on his shoulder, her touch firm but reassuring. "Then you must act quickly. The Raven Queen will not rest until you are destroyed. But you have the truth on your side, Elian, and that is a power greater than any army." Elian stood tall, his eyes burning with the fire of determination. The battle for the throne was far from over. The city was in chaos, the kingdom fractured, and the magic of his bloodline had only just begun to awaken. But he would not be swayed. He would not be broken. It was time to claim his birthright. Chapter 8. Shadows of the Crown. The sky over Sere Thorn was a tapestry of bruised violet and ashen grey as dawn bled reluctantly over the horizon. The city, still reeling from the upheaval, held its breath. Fires had been extinguished, but the scent of smoke and scorched stone lingered, clinging to the air like the memory of a bad dream. The people whispered Elian's name in the streets, some with reverence, others with suspicion. A Vere heir had returned, and with him the magic that had once been buried beneath centuries of silence. Inside the war chamber, the air was thick with tension. A great table carved of obsidian and marked with the faded etchings of ancient battle maps stood at the centre. Elian leaned over it, hands pressed flat against its cold surface. Around him stood the remnants of old alliances, mages in moth-eaten robes, rebel captains with weathered faces, and nobles whose loyalty hung by the thread of opportunity. High Magister Selene stood at his side, her presence commanding. "The eastern provinces are stirring," she said, her finger tracing a worn edge of the map. "The House of Calvaris has declared neutrality, for now, but the Iron Marches still report to Thalendra. Her grip is weakening, but it is far from broken." Elian didn't speak. His jaw tightened as his gaze traced the borders of the kingdom he was supposed to reclaim, not with conquest, not with fear, but with truth. The problem was, truth moved slower than an army, and it bled more easily. "We can't hold the palace if we don't gain the support of the Eastern Guilds," said Captain Mereth, her grizzled voice cutting through the murmurs of the room. "They control the supply lines. The Inquisitors will starve us out before they try storming the gates." Selene's expression remained calm, but her eyes flicked to Elian. "We need to send an emissary." "I'll go," Rowan said without hesitation. He stepped forward, the glint in his eyes sharp with defiance. "They know me. I've traded with them. If I ride by dusk, I can reach the outpost by first light." Elian looked at him, something unspoken passing between them. Trust wasn't given lightly in a world built on betrayal, but Rowan had proven himself time and again, not just as a friend, but as someone who believed, someone who stood even when the foundations cracked. "Go," Elian said quietly. "Take 2 riders. Tell them the age of silence is over. Tell them the heir of House Vare speaks not for conquest, but for restoration." Rowan gave a sharp nod and left the chamber with the grace of a shadow. The door creaked shut behind him, and a silence fell once more. Outside, the day crept forward, and with it, unease. Within the deep lower halls of the palace, beneath stone and shadow, Celine led Elian down a winding staircase that hadn't seen torchlight in decades. "They used to call this place the Hall of Echoes," Celine murmured. "Built before even the first Vare king sat the throne. It was said the walls could hear your secrets and speak them back in dreams." Elian's footsteps echoed against the stone, each step feeling like a descent not just into the palace, but into something older, deeper. At the bottom of the stair a door waited. A single rune burned faintly upon its surface, pulsing like a heartbeat. Celine placed her hand over it, murmuring a word Elian couldn't hear. The rune flared. The door opened. Inside was not a vault nor a tomb, but a garden, or what had once been one. Vines, pale and dormant, snaked across cracked stone. A single tree stood at its centre, its branches bare, its bark a deep silvery grey that shimmered faintly with magic. "This is the heartroot," Celine said. "It is the last living remnant of the old bond, the connection between magic and the land. When the Vare kings ruled in harmony with the ley, this tree bloomed. When the bloodline was broken, it withered." Elian stepped forward, his breath catching in his throat. He could feel it, something ancient stirring in the roots. A whisper that called not to his mind, but to the blood in his veins. "What do I do?" he asked. Celine gave him a small, almost wistful smile. "You listen." He reached out, fingers brushing the bark. And in an instant the world vanished. Visions surged through him, flashes of the past, of golden fields once tended by druids, of kings kneeling before the heartroot to receive its blessing. He saw his ancestors, not as warriors, but as stewards, protectors of balance. And then the vision darkened. He saw fire, screams, the Raven Queen rising from shadows, binding magic with iron and lies, and at the centre of it all, a broken promise. Elian gasped and stumbled back. Celine caught him before he fell. "It's still alive," he whispered. "The bond, it's still there." She nodded. "But barely. You must mend it, Elian. Magic alone won't be enough. You must restore the old covenant. You must become more than king." Elian stared at the tree, the weight of prophecy pressing down upon him. In the distance a bell began to toll, 3 times. A warning. The outer gates had been breached. Celine's face turned grim. "They're coming." Elian's hand curled into a fist. "Then we don't wait any longer. Gather the people. We speak tonight in the old square." "And what will you tell them?" she asked. Elian met her gaze, his voice firm. "The truth." Chapter 9. The Queen of Ash. The smoke of rebellion still lingered in the corridors of Ser Thorn, even as dawn broke over the ravaged palace. The city outside was restless, neither at war nor at peace, caught between the crumbling legacy of Queen Thalendra and the uncertain promise of Elian's rule. But the Raven Queen was not finished. In the deepest vault beneath the palace, beyond the reach of fire or steel, Queen Thalendra stood before a fractured mirror, her robes tattered, her hair unbound. The inquisitors that remained were loyal to her by fear alone, their faith broken, their numbers dwindled. Yet Thalendra's eyes gleamed with undying resolve. "Let them think the crown is theirs," she murmured. "Let them rebuild atop rot." Behind her, the ancient glyphs carved into the obsidian walls pulsed faintly. This was no ordinary chamber. It had been sealed centuries ago, built to contain something far older than kings and bloodlines, the source of her dominion. Her magic was not born of inheritance, but of pact. The price she paid had been buried in silence, until now. With trembling hands she drew blood from her palm and pressed it against the final rune. Above, in the great hall, Elian stood before a council hastily assembled, mages, generals, former nobles and survivors of the insurrection. He looked different now, not just a boy with power, but a leader who had seen the cost of truth. The silver circlet no longer felt foreign on his brow. "We stand at the edge of something new," he began, "but we can't build the future if we don't confront what remains of the past. Rowan sat beside him, bruised but alive, his sharp eyes watching the hall. Selene stood on Elian's other side, her staff aglow, the ancient sigils of House Vaya swirling faintly in the air around her. Magic lived again in the court, no longer hidden. Then the ground trembled. It was not the aftershock of rebellion. It was older, deeper. Selene's face paled. She's awakened it. Elian turned sharply. What? The source of her power. She's broken the last seal. The vault below, where even the old kings feared to tread, it's open. A great roar echoed through the palace, as if the stones themselves screamed. Shadows poured from the lower levels, viscous, writhing things that moved like smoke but bit like fire. The last of Thalendra's magic had taken form. She's trying to bind the soul of the kingdom itself, Selene said. If she succeeds, even your bloodline won't be enough. Without hesitation, Elian moved toward the stairwell that led to the vaults, his steps sure, his eyes alight. Then I'll stop her myself. Rowan cursed and followed. You really are impossible. The descent felt like a passage through time, each step down into the dark bringing them closer to the heart of the kingdom's rot. As they entered the final chamber, the sight before them froze them in place. Queen Thalendra stood in a circle of molten light, her body trembling under the weight of raw, unbound power. Around her, spectres of the old kings twisted in agony, their spirits harnessed as fuel. Her voice was a whisper and a scream, her arms outstretched. You cannot stop me, Elian. This kingdom belongs to me. Its past, its present, its soul. Elian stepped forward. No, it belongs to the people. You've ruled by fear long enough. He raised his hand, and the magic of House Vaya surged forth, brilliant and wild. But Thalendra laughed, and her shadows struck out. The chamber became a storm of power, light against darkness, legacy against dominion. Elian faltered, the weight of her spell clawing at his bones. But Selene joined him, her voice rising in an incantation older than language. Rowan stood at his back, sword drawn, holding the shadows at bay. I am not alone, Elian said as his voice rose above the chaos, and neither is this kingdom. With one final cry, he drove the full force of his bloodline magic into the circle, severing the queen from her tether. The vault exploded with light. Chapter 10. A Kingdom Remade. Silence followed the burst of light. When Elian opened his eyes, the vault was still. The molten runes had dimmed to ash, and the oppressive weight of Thalendra's magic was gone. At the center of the shattered ritual circle, the Raven Queen lay crumpled, her body twisted, her crown cracked and broken at her feet. She was still breathing, but only barely. Rowan approached cautiously, his sword lowered. It's over. Elian didn't move at first. He stood over her, breathing hard, the magic within him slowly settling. There was no triumph in his gaze, only the emptiness of victory won at great cost. Thalendra opened her eyes. Even now, the defiance had not fully left her. You think this changes anything? She rasped. You've inherited a corpse, not a kingdom. No, Elian said quietly. I've inherited the truth, and that's enough. She laughed, a brittle, bitter sound, before slipping into unconsciousness. Selene stepped forward and laid a hand on Elian's arm. It's done. Her magic is broken. The kingdom is yours now, but that was not the end, only the beginning. Over the next days, the palace halls echoed not with screams, but with rebuilding. The fires were extinguished, the rubble cleared, and the banners of House Vaya, silver upon midnight blue, were raised once again above Carthorne. But Elian refused the coronation his advisers urged upon him. There would be no parades, no public spectacles of power, not yet. Instead, he walked the streets himself, with Rowan at his side, hearing the voices of the people, those who had feared him, those who had fought for him, and those still unsure. He didn't speak as a king. He listened. And slowly, word by word, a fractured kingdom began to stitch itself together. The Inquisition was dismantled, its prisons opened. The vaults that had stored forbidden magic were unlocked, not to release chaos, but to teach. Selene, now High Magister in name as well as role, began the painstaking process of restoring the magical archives. Elian declared them open to all, regardless of blood or birth. A new council was formed, not just nobles, but tradespeople, mages, and even farmers. No more would one voice rule all, and as for Thalendra, she was exiled, not executed. Elian refused to spill blood in the name of justice. Let her live to see the kingdom thrive without her, he said. That will be punishment enough. One evening, weeks after the vault battle, Elian stood again in the throne room. The golden seat, once a symbol of dominance, had been reforged. It was still a throne, but humbler now, carved from ironwood and adorned not with gemstones, but with carved runes from the old tongue. It was a seat of memory, not tyranny. Rowan entered without ceremony. Still brooding? Elian smiled faintly, just thinking about what comes next. Rowan handed him a piece of parchment. It was aged, its seal unbroken. This came from the archives. One of the vault scribes found it beneath a collapsed wing. Elian broke the seal, his fingers suddenly uncertain. Inside, a single line. The bloodline persists not in names, but in choices. Choose well, Forgotten Heir. No signature, no crest, but the ink shimmered with magic, faint and familiar. Rowan read over his shoulder, then gave him a sideways glance. Cryptic as always. Elian folded the parchment carefully and tucked it into the folds of his cloak. "There's more out there," he said. "More truth, more history, and I'll find it." "You don't have to," Rowan replied. "You've already done enough." Elian shook his head. "Not enough, just the beginning." He walked to the balcony and looked out over Caer Thorn, its rooftops catching the last light of sunset, its towers no longer cloaked in smoke. The city had changed. The kingdom had changed. So had he. "I'm not a ruler of old," he said softly. "I'm not here to be obeyed. I'm here to make sure we never back to what we were." Rowan stood beside him. "Then I think you already succeeded." A breeze stirred the banners above. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called, one last cry for the past before night fell on a kingdom reborn. And far below, in the rebuilt archives, a door creaked open, waiting. Epilogue, the echo in the archives. Years had passed since fire lit the streets of Caer Thorn, since the banners of rebellion unfurled, and the truth of Elian Vea's bloodline shattered centuries of silence. The city no longer trembled beneath the weight of fear, nor did it bow to shadows. Instead, it breathed. Caer Thorn had become a different kind of capital, not one built on conquest, but on remembrance, not ruled by power, but by knowledge. And at its heart stood the restored archives, a living monument to what had been forgotten and what had been found. Children now walked the very halls that once sealed away truth, their fingers trailing along shelves thick with parchment, their eyes wide with wonder as ancient runes whispered back to them. Scholars debated beneath starlit domes. Magisters instructed new apprentices in the careful, reverent handling of magic, no longer outlawed but guided. The language of the old world was spoken aloud once more. And through it all, King Elian remained true to his word. He had not rebuilt a palace, he had rebuilt a foundation. Magic, once feared and hunted, had been woven back into the fabric of daily life, not as a weapon, but as a thread of connection, between land and people, sky and spirit, past and future. Yet peace was not without its echoes. Whispers still drifted through alleyways and across borderlands. There were those who would never accept a king touched by the old blood. Some called him a usurper. Others claimed the magic would corrupt him as it had corrupted those before. Their voices were quieter now, but they had not vanished. Dissent, like memory, never truly died. Elian knew this, and still he stood firm. On a quiet evening, as silver moonlight spilled through the windows of the great archive, Elian found himself alone among the scrolls. He moved slowly, reverently, his fingers brushing the spines of tomes once thought lost to time. Magic pulsed faintly beneath the bindings. Memory lingered like perfume. Here, in this place of knowledge and ghosts, he felt most himself, not as ruler, but as seeker. The creak of the door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned, unsurprised, to find Rowan in the archway. His old friend's face had aged, but his eyes were the same, sharp, loyal, carrying burdens of his own. "Elian," Rowan said softly, stepping inside, "there's something you should see." He held out a piece of parchment, worn and fragile, the ink faded at its edges. Elian took it, his breath catching as his gaze fell upon the sigil pressed into the seal, a raven perched upon a silver crown. It was the mark of his house, but older still, perhaps the first. Elian opened the letter with care. The words were sparse, written in a hand long dead. To the child of the bloodline, the forgotten heir of House Vere. This letter is the last of its kind, a final decree. You are the bearer of magic, of a kingdom lost to time. The road you walk is one of sacrifice and truth. You must protect what is left, for the past will not remain buried. The final lines dissolved into an ancient dialect, one Elian could barely decipher, though the weight of them settled in his chest like prophecy. He looked up. There's more, Rowan nodded. We think it came from before the Purge, before the archives were sealed. Someone knew this day would come. Elian was quiet for a long moment. Then, you mean there are others like me? Not many, Rowan said. But yes, the bloodline wasn't entirely broken. It's scattered, hid. Some still wait in silence, others may not be waiting at all. The scroll trembled slightly in Elian's hands, as though the ink itself remembered. I thought restoring the throne would be the end, Elian murmured, but it's only the surface. Rowan placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. The truth is never simple, Elian. It's not a single story. It's a living thing. And as Elian turned once more to the shelves that surrounded them, to the vast tapestry of forgotten history and unseen futures, he understood. The journey of the Forgotten Heir was not over. It had only just begun.